Shove it, man! Alright, it's the master of the brick to the brain and the excellence of executing punches to the gut. And I've got one of those for you today. All throughout the history of TNA, they've made the same mistake of hyping things up when they really aren't going to happen, or the announcement just falls flat. And it nearly always resulted in a loss of audience and the company's reputation being dragged through the dirt. Something that Tony Khan gets criticism for nowadays. Whilst I don't know much about that, I'm sure you all will. And my only advice to AEW and Tony Khan is that you can learn a lot from the mistakes of TNA. I'm sure you'll all let me know in the comments if Tony Khan's announcements live up to the hype. But I'm not here to talk about him today. It's TNA's time and there's just so many mistakes they've made over the years. Whether that was making a storyline out of Kurt, Angle, Karen and Slapnut's real life love triangle, the re-debut of Tito Ortiz, 10 different returns for the Icon Sting, resigning Bram to a TNA contract 50 times, the Jesse Sorensen situation. Most of these mistakes and missteps happened during Dixie Carter's time in charge. But what was the first major TNA mistake they ever made? And I ain't talking choosing the name TNA. This is the story of TNA's first major mistake. Surprisingly, TNA made their first mistake as early as October 2003, only a year and 4 months into the company's existence. And this whole sad episode would really set the tone for future TNA business. Looking back on this, it made TNA look extremely Bush League and stupid. There was a big buzz in the crowd, and they felt like TNA was on the verge of some big news. Mike Tenay announced the biggest news in TNA history he possibly could, but in typical tacky TNA fashion, they held up 2 newspapers and filmed them. It showed Hulk Hogan making his in-ring return in New Japan Wrestling as he beat Masa Shono as he dropped the leg and hit him with the Axe Bomber clothesline. But the bigger news is what happened after that match. We'll come on to that, but first. Hogan had left the WWE in July 2003 due to frustrations with pay and storylines. He'd been doing his Mr. America gimmick. Back in TNA land, they were on the verge of their first ever pay-per-view and there was a huge hype going into their first show. It was Bound for Glory 2003. What? I've literally never heard of that show. I think I've taken too many bricks to the brain. We'll see. Anyway, TNA felt like they needed a huge star to appear on their first ever pay-per-view. We get exclusive video footage from Japan. Hogan, accompanied by Jimmy Hart, wrestled in the Tokyo Dome in front of a crowd of 47,000. After his victory, he tried to address the media. He tells them that he has unfinished business in the United States and he's never been the NWA champion and he wants to do it. And a wild Slapnuts appears.
Double J, Jeff Jarrett.
He smashes Hogan with his guitar and beats the Hawk out of him. Now this would have been a pretty cool start to an angle, but unfortunately Jarrett isn't even the NWA Heavyweight Champion, so why did he burst in and attack Hogan when he mentioned the belt? Can you imagine if instead they'd used the actual champion AJ Styles to do this angle? I doubt Hogan would sell an attack from Styles in 2003, but it's fun to think about. This attack has regularly been listed as one of the greatest moments of TNA history, but I disagree, it isn't, because all this hype and telly time is spent on something which won't be good. But anyway, we're far from the end of this storyline. Slappy cuts a promo to address why he decided to attack Hogan in Japan. Jarrett can barely talk because all the crowd are pleading and chanting for Hogan to come out to the ring. Jarrett eventually explains that Hogan is a self-serving son of a bitch, and he'd heard rumours that Hogan was about to sign with TNA. He'd also heard rumours that Hogan was going to get a heavyweight title shot. So Jarrett attacked Hogan to scare him away for having a match against Styles in TNA. Jarrett also tells us that when Hogan joins a company, he takes all the credit, all the belts, and all the money. Slapnuts proclaims that it's personal because him and Hogan really don't like each other, and he refuses to talk about the Bash at the Beach incident in WCW. The crowd are now at fever pitch chanting for the Hawkster, but they don't get him. Instead, Vince Russo runs out and attacks Slapnuts. It's not quite the same thing, is it? As a TNA fan, that promo told you a few things, but mainly it told us that Hogan was in talks with TNA and we could expect to see him in a TNA ring soon. I find that incredibly hard to believe. Hogan in the TNA asylum with less than 1,000 fans facing AJ Styles for the belt in a filthy brown beanie. And they just won't stop hyping Hogan's TNA debut. They get Hogan's longtime manager Jimmy Hart on the phone, so you know it's definitely happening if Jimmy Hart is on board. They literally go off the air with Jimmy Hart as the main event. Hart threatens Slapnuts for his Hogan attack. He reveals Hogan has been left with 35 stitches from the guitar shot. He tells Slapnuts he's going to need to employ some bodyguards because you never know when Hogan is going to appear in TNA. Sooner or later, Slapnuts will come face to face with Hogan. Mike Tenay asks, is Hogan going to be in the asylum? To which Jimmy Hart responds that Hogan is coming. Slapnuts, who looks like he cut his own hair with a spoon, says he's going to become the heavyweight champion and there's nothing that Jimmy Hart can do about that one. Next week, Dusty Rhodes congratulates Slapnuts on taking out the Hulkster in Japan, but the hype doesn't stop there because Jimmy Hart gets a ring interview. He's described by Mike TNA as the legendary manager of Hulk Hogan. Hart is accompanied by the American-made theme music. It really feels like Hogan should be shown up at any point now. TNA asked him if the rumours are true that Hogan is going to be at Bound for Glory. Jimmy says the fans definitely need to buy the pay-per-view. Jimmy Hart reveals that over the last 3 months, him and the Hulkster have actually been watching TNA and they are impressed. He confirms that Hogan's attorney Henry Holmes has been speaking to TNA. No rumours, this is all facts. Mike TNA asks him if Hogan has actually signed with TNA, and wow. Jimmy Hart goes ahead and says that Hogan has definitely signed with TNA. The crowd go berserk at this news. So there we have it, Hogan is a TNA wrestler. He moves on to once again threaten Slapnuts. But Hogan will not be having a match at the pay-per-view because Jarrett has smashed up his knee too badly. The match has been rescheduled. No mention of the pay-per-view itself. Someone smacked TNA with a brick, it never was scheduled in the first place. I think this is what they call putting all your eggs in one basket. They talk about Bash at the Beach again, with Hart asking Jarrett why he laid down for Hogan in the biggest match of his career. He demands to get answers. Jarrett walks out in a fit of rage because he doesn't want to talk about Bash at the Beach. The crowd all chant why at Slapnuts. Jarrett blames Hogan but doesn't actually say why, and he beats the hawk out of Jimmy Hart. He rips Hart's shirt open and belts him time and time again. Jarrett's taunting Hogan now. Surely the main man is about to run or limp his way down the ring at any moment. Hart screaming, Hulk's the man! Surely our hero the Hulkster makes the save for his loyal manager. No, instead AJ Styles makes the save. Well, I guess it's an upgrade on Vince Russo. What a crazy segment, but the main thing to come out of it is, can you believe TNA literally told us that Hogan had officially signed with TNA? Get your head around that brick. That same night, Jarrett captures the NWA Heavyweight title for the second time, which leads you on to believe that the match with Hogan is definitely on the horizon. Jimmy Hart swears revenge, but I guess because Hogan can't actually do anything due to his busted knee that Hart has to find a backup dancer. TNA knew that Hogan couldn't do anything, but they continued constantly talking about him on the show. Jarrett hypes up how all the media are still buzzing from his attack, and the TNA crowd constantly chant "We want Hogan." They don't get him though, and instead it leads to Sting and other WCW names coming for old Slappy. So November 30th came and went, and the first Bound for Glory pay-per-view has been completely forgotten about. The pay-per-view was completely scrapped and never mentioned again. A weird piece of TNA history. Apparently it was meant to be in Las Vegas. In fact, TNA would do their first pay-per-view a year later when they held Turning Point 2004. Ironically, Hogan would actually be backstage at this pay-per-view, but he wouldn't appear on camera. Reportedly, there was an altercation between the two as well. Hogan was annoyed with Macho, who had dissed him on his rap album, while Scott Hall was egging Hogan on and telling him to beat Macho Man up. Hogan offered to shake hands with Macho, who swore at him, and then Hogan offered to fight him, but no one did anything. What a bunch of pussies. Despite Jimmy Hart saying that Hogan had signed with TNA, he never had, and Hogan stopped being mentioned on TV after a bit. The whole event made TNA look incredibly stupid and Bush League. They let the fans down because they promised a pay-per-view which didn't happen. They promised Hogan had signed a contract, he hadn't. And they wasted several weeks of television hyping something that was a complete waste of airtime. Behind the scenes, it's widely reported that Hogan was just stringing TNA management along to gain leverage for his WWE return. It was also revealed that Hogan was asking for an insane payment for the upstart TNA company. Hulk Hogan returned to the WWE, but it wasn't until April 2005. That's quite a big gap from November 2003 when he was originally negotiating with TNA. And during that time, the dirt sheets constantly told us that Hogan was about to sign for the company. So yeah, it appears that Hogan just used TNA for leverage to get a WWE contract once he had recovered from his knee injury. What a mess. It's a surprise that after a mistake like that, TNA even managed to progress afterwards. It's fortunate they didn't sell tickets to that pay-per-view, because that really would have been game over for them. Let's get a bit of a discussion going in the comments though. In some crazy parallel universe, if the Hawkster had signed with TNA in 2003, what would he have done? Surely he wouldn't have lost to Jarrett at the pay-per-view. So if Hogan's your champ, who does he even feud with? They have no other big stars on his level. Can they even afford to bring Sting in if they bring in Hogan? Hogan sure ain't doing the JB to Styles or Truth, that's for damn sure. So it's my guess that Hogan in TNA would have only ever been a one-off appearance with Slappy, and the match would have ended in some sort of screwy way. And if you don't agree with that, my gut-punching combo will make you pay.